Thank you for the effort. Thank you, Matias. Thank you, Marcelo, and everyone around this effort, which I think is, as Joe said, a good starting point, and we hope to do more of these and improve along the way and make them increasingly interesting. I hope I'm not going to repeat what has already been said. I'm going to try and be sort of somehow different, but it's going to be rather difficult. So, but I'll do my best. I mean, one point I want to make, and I think based on what has been said before, and trying to sort of expand the structure of the discussion, is that regional projects are moving animals. I mean, they're not necessarily moving targets. I mean, what I'm trying to make the point is that they adapt, they move, they shift. They are starting points rather than final points of destination. And this is important because what we have today in the region, as everyone has said before me, is that we have a number of projects, and that means a number of starting points. So we have to ask, why do we have these different starting points? And one point that I want to make about Latin America that is sometimes sort of not clearly brought into the picture when we talk of trade integration. I mean, there's something we know, but we don't put together with trade integration, is that Latin America, the peculiarity of Latin America is that it exports natural resources to the world. And so it builds economic integration with a model of economic integration that is not Europe or is not Asia. In Europe, you had intra-firm trade, almost 40 to 50% of trade before the European community was built, was 40 to 50% was intra-firm trade and was intra-European trade. And it was, of course, manufacturers, where Europe imported from the world natural resources. In Asia, you have a different pattern. In Asia, you have global value chains that drive the process, that carry the day, that build integration bottom up. So in Latin America, you do not have this. I mean, you had that at one point, a sort of certain homogeneidad, digamos, where you had import substitution. So everyone was doing import substitution. Everyone was doing state planning. We then had the Latin American Free Trade Area, or LAIA, when it was adapted and it was changed to the Latin American Integration Association. But what we have now is that we cannot build on the templates, we cannot even build on the theories of economic integration. We have a pattern of trying to build economic integration based on natural resource exports to the world. It was, of course, easier when there was import substitution because then everyone was doing the same thing, so everyone was going in the same direction. What we have now is, as I said before, different starting points. So this is one of the characteristics I want to point out about differences, and I'm going to pick this up, the idea of differences, later on. Today, regional projects, I mean, if we try to put order, and this is going to be difficult, we try to put order to what we have in the region. The regional projects can be grouped into four. We have the pre-existing 1990s projects, CAN and Mercosur in particular, which have lost steam, they've lost steam, but they have not been rolled back. They're still there, and they still have to be taken into account. That is one group of, let's call it trade integration. There's another group, the second group is the Pacific Alliance, which is also trade integration, as David described. It's trade with the world, it's a global sort of trading vision of integration with the world. And then we have ALBA, mentioned also by Joe and by Marcelo, which is of course Venezuela is a Venezuelan-led process. It's more sort of promoting social power, promoting soft power, promoting different types of social and political cooperation. And fourthly, we have UNASUR, the Brazilian-led project, which promotes geographical connectivity and port development, road development, highway development, railroad development. It's geographical connectivity. It's the point of UNASUR mainly, I mean the main point I would say, is to make the region rather than to trade, is to make the region, to promote the geographical connectivity in order that you do have a region to speak of. It's a region building process. These latter two, UNASUR and ALBA, in a way can come together as de-emphasizing continuity with the project of the FTAA, or put it more directly, emphasizing discontinuities with the FTAA project or the US-led arrangements of the 1990s. I mean, both ALBA and UNASUR, and there is some competition there between Venezuela and Brazil, want to recapture the region. And for both, or for neither, ALBA nor UNASUR, is trade the glue. Trade is not the glue for UNASUR, trade is not the glue for ALBA, nor is it the neoliberal vision. I mean, they both have to do with different forms of state-led cooperation. I mean, they're both region-building efforts, one more based on, as I said before, social power or social development, and the other one more on geographical connection, building the region. But neither ALBA nor UNASUR are predicated on trade regionalism, and that's the essence of both ALBA and UNASUR. Of course, countries come together around these different projects with different interests and different incentives and different stances, which are all which are closely related to their previous FTAA stances. But of course, those FTAA stances were also connected to their patterns of specialization. They are path-dependent interests. There's movement, of course, but there are patterns of specialization that mark where each country stands on these different projects. The new element, of course, today is the presence of China. Not only presence, physical presence in the sense of supporting different development projects as an investor, as a promoter of different investments, but also the Chinese craving for commodities, the Chinese craving for foodstuffs, which has heightened the prices of exports for most of the countries in the region. So this is also a very special coyuntura in which we face high or relatively high export prices, which is also very special or very, very different from the history of Latin America. What we have in terms of these patterns of specialization is almost 3 or 4 patterns. One is North America and Central America, which historically have always been closer to the United States, although at the center of that block today is also China, if I may call that block a block, but I mean, let's say it is a block. I mean, at the center of that North American and Central American block, I mean, the Chinese presence is very important in a number of ways. Of course, it's important in Panama. I mean, Panama's almost 100% of its export earnings come from Panama Canal. And of course, the more trade there is, the higher the export earnings of Panama. And the more east-west trade there is, the better for Panama. And that in itself, and the sort of the hyperactivity in the east-west direction, is creating the need for a new Panama Canal, for a broadened Panama Canal, for a modernized Panama Canal, for a new canal in Nicaragua, and for a new, se llama el Canal Seco de Colombia, which is also going to build a railroad that crosses the Colombian bit of the isthmus. So there you have a very big incentive provided by the Chinese, as I said, craving rather than presence, although part of the Canal Seco is going to be financed by China. China is also very present in Costa Rica, thanks to the presence of the firm Intel that invested about 15 years ago in a plant, and today Intel is the leading exporter of Costa Rica. 30% of Costa Rica's exports are in the hands of Intel today, and a lot of that goes to Malaysia, to Hong Kong, to China, and to the Asia Pacific. So China has a and of course Costa Rica has an FTAA with China as well. So China in a way is playing very not so subtle roles in many regions in Latin America. South of Panama, we have a pattern that is also related to the Asia Pacific, as David was saying. I mean, we have what we can call a Pacific bias, with minerals and exports being exported from Colombia, Peru, and Chile, and to a great extent Mexico as well, one of exporting services and transport and the retailing of goods, especially in, I mean, the retailers are central in this export pattern, especially in Colombia, Peru, and Chile. So that's what I call the Pacific bias. And then we have an Atlantic bias that is sort of revolves around Mercosur, which exports foodstuffs to the world and manufactures to the region. And that has to do with the region building that many of these countries are so interested in. So to conclude, how do we put all this together? The question that I was going to ask is, should we put it together? I mean, why do we have to assume that there has to be cohesion? Why do we have to assume that there has to be homogeneidad? I mean, these are countries with different interests, and as they move along the development road, and as they mature along the development road, we can only think of differences, or we should be thinking of difference. It's like when the kids grow up, and I have a family, I mean, los chicos van, los chicos vienen, but when they grow up, they have a name, they have interests, they want to do certain things, and we have to attend to those interests without minimizing the idea of difference as something that has to be corrected, rather than something that has to be lived with. So differences have to do, and they are there, and they have to do with the new maturity in the region and the new interest, which doesn't mean, and this is where I want to conclude, that there aren't political efforts of coordination. And maybe this is where there is, I wouldn't say cohesion, but there is convergencia. Convergencia would mean differences in the way that Marcelo put it. There's pluralism. But there is I think most governments in the region, despite their different economic interests, despite their ideological differences, despite their political differences, see a need for certain minimal roles of coordination. And this is where partly UNASUR plays a role and partly CELAC also plays a role. Thank you very much.
Thank you to you.